Welcome to the afternoon session of the Board of County Commissioners. Welcome to Harris Hall. We have a very full agenda this afternoon, Mr. Mokrahasky, as you've noted, beginning with a 1:30 time certain. So we'll move directly into the agenda. Item 12A is a third reading and continued public hearing on Ordinance 2305 in the matter of adopting Lane Code LC 16.290 to incorporate an allowance for accessory dwelling units, ADU, in rural residential zones as allowed by Senate Bill 391 in 2021 and Senate Bill 644 in 2023, and an allowance for conversion of a historic dwelling to an ADU as allowed by House Bill 3012 in 2017, and adopting a savings and severability clause and declaring an emergency. It's file number 509 PA 22 05378. Now, this is a public hearing. It's on a county-initiated Type 4 legislative land use application to amend Lane County's code. And today, of course, is August 29th. The proposed Lane Code amendments are subject to the applicable criteria identified in Lane Code 12.100.005, 12.100.050, and 16.252.2, and applicable to rural comprehensive plan policies. The order of proceeding for this hearing will be first a report by staff, which will be followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. A board may have questions at that time. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance with ORS Chapter 197. At this point in time, I'm going to call for disclosure of any commissioner's abstentions due to a conflict of interest or biases, and I'll begin on my far left with Commissioner Laval.
No bias.
Commissioner Buck.
None.
To my right, Vice Chair Trieger.
None to declare.
And Commissioner Senega.
None.
And I have none to declare, other than I've been talking about this for a lot of years. Are there any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear the matter? Ms. Jones, any challenges online that you're aware of? I hear none. Then at this point, we will hear the report by staff. And Mr. Mokrahasky, I'll take the liberty of introducing Ms. Surslow.
Thank you, Chair Farr, and good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, this is Rachel Surslow, Staff Planner for the ADU Code Amendments. And this is a third reading and continued public hearing of Ordinance number 2305, also identified as Land Management Division File number 509 PA 22-05378. And this code amendment was last before the board on August 1st for a second reading and public hearing. Prior to that hearing, staff had identified necessary changes to the draft code prompted by Senate Bill 80. Those changes include the name to the statewide wildfire risk map, which was changed to be called a hazard map, and also some revisions to the risk classifications on that map. And these things are referenced in the proposed ADU code, so we wanted to change those references before putting the adoption before you. On August 1st, the board approved the second reading with those changes, needed to comply with Senate Bill 80 and set a third reading and continued public hearing for today. And today, staff is before you recommending that the board adopt Ordinance 2305 as written, and that concludes my staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Surslow. We'll now hear public testimony. I have one person signed up in Harris Hall for testimony, after which we'll consider testimony online. So the first person signed up for public testimony on Ordinance 2305 is Yashan Razor. Ms. Razor, if you will, Yashan Razor, if you will please step to the mic, identify yourself, and at that point you will have 3 minutes to speak, and your time will begin after you identify yourself.
My name is Yashani Razor, and I live just outside of Cottage Grove, so essentially Cottage Grove, and this would affect my family. I don't know if it is still an issue or an argument about the issue with not being able to rebuild if a ADU that is kind of grandfathered in would not be able to rebuild. Is that still an issue, or is that not an issue anymore?
We will address that perhaps during staff presentation questions later.
Okay. Then I would like to argue that if that is to be addressed, that the that this would be accepted as is, and that could be addressed after the fact if that is an option, because I think that this provides a quick way to help with housing in our community. I think it directly affects families who have already built, including my family, and so we are stuck right now, and we have an old house, and we will have to tear out parts of our kitchen, record a covenant against our deed anyways, and then at some point when this comes through, we'll have to hire an attorney and see about how to remove that covenant, then reinstall a kitchen, and then apply for the new permit to have a guest house. And so my argument would be that the risk of homes that might face significant fire damage, the benefit of adopting it now outweighs the risk of what that might be, would be my argument. Especially because there's a lot of expenses that people will certainly face rather than hypothetically would face, as far as permitting as a guest house and then having to go back and permit as an ADU, if that's an option. I think that's all I had. Yep, that was all that I had.
Thank you, Dear Fundraiser. I've made note of that, and I'll make certain that that is addressed during the discussion that we have ensuing.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones, has anyone signed up online for Ordinance 2305?
Hi, Chair Farr. Yeah, I do see people online. At this time, if you have signed up to give testimony on this ordinance, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on you to give your testimony. You will have 3 minutes to speak to the board. If you would like to speak to the board, please raise your hand now. Chair Farr, I do not see any hand. Oh, there goes one. I see Warren Wren. Warren, I will unmute your microphone. I will ask you if you'd like to be on camera. And if you would, I'll switch you over to camera. Otherwise, you can give your testimony. I do show you are self-muted, Warren. There you go. Would you like to be on camera?
Yeah, on camera is fine if that's helpful. I don't mind.
Okay, one moment. You'll need to accept the panelist invitation and then you'll switch over. There you are. If you would unmute your camera and your microphone, we can hear you and see you. And you may begin your public comments.
Okay, thank you. My name is Warren Rain. I live outside of Lowell in rural residential area zoning. And I would like to agree with the last testimony that we heard, that I find it would be very useful to any number of residents here with buildings in limbo, as was just mentioned, to have a rapid approval of this new rule. And postpone any further consideration of the fire issues or the rebuild to some later date after acceptance of the ordinance as it is now proposed. I think it's very helpful to provide some additional residential housing in this manner for the community. It's very helpful to the community, very helpful for the life of the community in these rural areas where there are no options for people to stay, and certainly alleviate the housing situation. So I'm very much in support of going ahead as soon as we can on this particular ordinance. And that concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. One moment, so I will check to see if we have others. One moment. It looks like I do have another hand up. Richard Brack. Richard, if you would, I will unmute your microphone, and if you'd let me know if you'd like to be on camera, I can switch you over. One moment. Richard, there you go. Would you like to be on camera?
No. Thank you.
All right, you may begin your public testimony.
I'm not sure what this means about, but I'm going to talk about this morning's meeting about the equity stuff you got going on. I've lived in Lane County for 60 years. I moved out of Eugene last year because the taxes were getting so high.
Mr. Brass, this is a public hearing for testimony on Ordinance 2302. Do you have testimony on this ordinance? 2305.
I just don't believe this bullshit you guys are doing with the. You used to go to work, you first did a time.
Chair Farr, I did mute Mr. Bratt since this is a public hearing on that ordinance. I do have a few other people online. If you would like to raise, if you're signed on to testify, please raise your hand and I'll call upon you. Chair Farr, I do not see any other hands being raised, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And I'll mention to Mr. Bratz, if Mr. Bratz is still listening, and to others, that we do have an opportunity for public testimony on general subjects at the beginning of each regular board meeting on Tuesdays. Our next will be on September 7th? 19th, excuse me. Wow, that's right. September 19th. Please feel free to be here in person or online. I'm going to look around Harris Hall. Is there anyone else in Harris Hall who wishes to provide testimony on Ordinance 2305? I am seeing none. Then we'll move down the agenda to staff response or any rebuttal if necessary.
Thank you, Chair Farr. I will address Ms. Razor's public comment, and I believe her public comment was regarding allowing the conversion of a dwelling being replaced and converting it to an ADU. That provision is still in the code that's before you today, as there was no board direction previously to remove that allowance from the proposed code, so staff is still recommending that that be adopted.
Excellent. And that should cover the questions. I believe that both testimonies provided. Very good. Anything else?
That's all.
At this point in time, I'll look to the board for any questions for staff or comments. Commissioner Lovall.
Thank you, Chair. I still have the same couple of questions I had last time for you, Rachel, so excuse me if this is a repeat. And I just want to make sure that on the bottom page 34, when you had the covenant of the applicant needs to have a restrictive covenant with Lane County Deeds and Records, is that something that even though we adopt this third reading today that we could remove, or is that a state statute, or is that something that the Lane County added? I'm curious.
If it were to be changed, after today, you could read in specific language today, or more reasonably, I think we would come back for at least 2 more hearings or 2 more readings in order to change that code. But to answer your other question, the requirement itself is a requirement of state law. I'm assuming you're referencing the prohibition to rebuild after a fire. Is that
no, just that the occupant or the property owner has to sign a restrictive covenant with Deeds and Records stating the ADU will be allowed under certain provisions under this section, primarily vacation and those sort of things.
Yes, so specifically, the vacation occupancy is a requirement of state law. The ADU cannot be used for vacation occupancy. The specific language that requires recording a covenant is not state law. That's something that staff added to make it clear to the property owner who's applying for the ADU that they will not be able to use it for vacation occupancy, and also to inform future buyers of that property that they will not be able to use the ADU for vacation occupancy.
So did I hear you say that the provision for the vacation option was added by Lane County staff? That's not part of state law?
It is state law that the ADU cannot be used for vacation occupancy. The requirement to record a covenant that the property owner recognizes that it can't be used for vacation occupancy, that part of the provision was added by staff. The requirement for the covenant.
I'm following you. I'm tracking you. Thank you for clearing that up. I mean, my preference would be if it wasn't state law to eliminate it entirely, because I'm not really in tune with putting more layers of restriction on property owners. So I'm trying to answer that question about how we could alleviate any unnecessary layers for property owners. So if there's any way of wiggle room with that, I'd like to pursue that. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I do hear what you're saying. As far as what the other folks testified today about rebuilding structures, we had that conversation last time about historic dwellings that were converted to ADUs, and there was a provision in there that said that if they were destroyed by fire or catastrophic loss, that they couldn't be rebuilt. Is that being adjusted as we move forward?
It is not proposed to be adjusted at this time. It's a requirement of state law that the structure can't be rebuilt, and so in order to be compliant and not less restrictive than state law, we're still proposing that.
So just be clear, obviously this doesn't set well, but I understand state law. just to be clear, as we're going forward, we're not adding anything on top of state law. We're staying with the minimum so that we can get folks the housing in all the ways possible that we can.
That's correct.
Good, that's my main objective, and thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovell. Questions, comments for staff? Then I have a quick question regarding the covenant. We're placing the covenant in their addition to state law. Can you state why we would need to do that?
We don't need to because it's not state law, but it is consistent with our practice in LMD in order to notify people who are coming in and applying for ADUs. It notifies them of the restrictions that apply to that structure and which they must comply with in using that structure. And then also when we have a covenant recorded, it usually comes up when a property is being bought or sold, so that a future property owner, when they're buying a property, will know the restrictions that apply to that structure when they buy it. So it's not a surprise to them when they purchase it and they want to use it for something and they end up not being able to.
So I'll paraphrase in terms that I may understand a little bit more clearly. So the owner acknowledges that is in place. Not necessary, but it is a separate acknowledgement. And also to prevent future surprises for potential buyers.
Yes, that's correct.
Good characterization, very good. Then with no further discussion, Board, we have a choice right now to close the evidentiary hearing and move forward. Do I have a motion?
So moved. I'll second.
The motion by Vice Chair Trieger is to close the evidentiary hearing and has been seconded by Commissioner Buck. Discussion to the motion. I close the hearing. Then, at this point in time, we're moving down to any further discussion by the board before we consider Ordinance 2305. Vice Chair Trieger.
Chair, I'll move approval of Ordinance 23-05 in the matter of amending Lane Code LC 16.2.90 to incorporate an allowance for accessory dwelling units, ADUs, in rural residential zones as allowed by Senate Bill 391, passed in 2021, and Senate Bill 644 in 2023, and an allowance for conversion of a historic dwelling to an ADU as allowed by House Bill 3010 from 2017 session, and adopting a savings and severability clause and declaring an emergency.
Second that?
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Lovell, acceptance of and adoption of Ordinance 2305. Discussion to that motion. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I think a lot of people have long awaited this particular item to be added as a possibility to their properties, especially those that have been rebuilding from the Holiday Farm fire and other fires in our area where this could be desperately needed housing. Also in our rural areas where people are aging in farmland and they need assistance to carry on and work their land. It's especially important for us to be able to provide additional housing opportunities, including those that are not within an urban growth boundary. And I urge my colleagues to vote aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Lovell.
Yes, just one more quick question before we vote, if you don't mind. If some reason in the future the legislator decides to change that law, what's our backup plan as far as removing those covenants from the people who have signed those in agreements? Is there a way that we can have a path forward with that, just in case?
If the state law were to change, we could do a code amendment so that our code was consistent with state law. But in regards to the covenant, that's not a specific requirement of state law. So I guess we could come back and do those code revisions if you didn't want to have a covenant.
I guess maybe just to not plug the system up if it happens to go further, which I think it might, maybe we take the covenant restriction out of that as part of our code, means we're adding it anyway. That would just be my suggestion. I think that would be more prudent going forward. Then it becomes what most everything is in the county, and that's complaint driven.
So your suggestion, Commissioner Lovell, is to, at this point in time, remove the covenant language from the ordinance that we are considering, which would be admissible. However, Mr. Slev, any response to that? Well, we don't have a second on that. Is that a motion?
I don't want to be out of order, so I'm not quite sure how to proceed. Help me out here.
Well, you could move to amend the language of the ordinance.
I would so moved if that was an issue we could do.
And Mr. Miller, if you have some clarification you can perhaps offer for us?
I'll see if there's a second to the motion. then
Very
I can
good.
clarify.
It's been moved to remove the covenant language, and I'm speaking very broadly there. I presume that you know the exact start of that sentence and the end of it from the ordinance that we are being considered that's been moved and seconded. Is there a second? The motion dies for lack of second. Then we'll move forward with further discussion on ordinance 2305. Then I'll just say one thing, and Commissioner Buck, thanks for urging us. I don't really need to be urged on this one. This is something we've been thinking about for a very long time, and I think maybe one of the first conversations we had, Kier, you and I, years and years ago, was how do we make provisions to allow people to put more front doors on their property? And the state's given us an avenue to do so, and we're doing this in compliance, not less restrictive than state law. If state law becomes more restrictive in the future, then we would adjust accordingly. If state law becomes less restrictive in the future, I presume we would also consider adjusting accordingly. So this is a good step. This is a good step that potentially is going to provide greater use of personal property for the people who own land outside of the urban growth boundaries in Eugene, in Lane County, excuse me, whether it be for family or for emergency medical or whatever it may be. So this is a good step. Any further discussion? Mr. Mokrahajski, this is an ordinance and it does require a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Senega,
Yay.
Commissioner Lovall,
Aye.
Commissioner Trieger,
Trigger votes yes.
Commissioner Buck,
Aye.
and Commissioner Farr.
Aye. Are you ready? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much for all the work that went into this, and it's not been a particularly easy path, even though the state did prescribe a path for us.
Thank you.
Path for us, so thank you very much. Right on. Then we'll move down our agenda. Let me clear the room. And we'll move on, Mr. Mokrahajski, to item 13A, Technology Services, which we have before us Order 2208-2906, in the matter of approving an IGA with the City of Eugene to transfer regional fire radio system management to Lane County, delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the IGA, and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the IGA with Lane County Fire Defense Board to define and provide said services. Ms. Mokrahajski, I will turn the floor to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Michael Harmon from Technology Services is going to take this item.
Thank you, Chair Farr and Commissioners. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I'm going to let the rest of my team introduce themselves. My name is Michael Harmon. I'm the Regional Radio System Manager at this point primarily for the radio system that supports police, public works, and emergency management across Lane County.
I am Andrew Smith, Fire Chief for Pleasant Hill Goshen Fire and Rescue, and I also represent the Lane County Fire Defense Board.
Good afternoon, Chair Farr and Commissioners. Patience Winningham, the Lane County Emergency Manager.
And we're here before you this afternoon, and first of all, we had several other fire chiefs that are going to be part of the guidance and policy committee for this group that intended to be here this afternoon. Several of them have been deployed in the last 48 hours on fires burning all across the area. They're going to be a fun group to corral. We'll just see how that goes. But Lane County has been approached both by the City of Eugene and by the Lane County Fire Defense Board with a request to provide management services for the fire radio system as a service. So Lane County has been providing management services for the shared UHF trunk system, what we call LRIG, the Lane Radio Interoperability Group, for a number of years. That has not included the fire system, the radio system used by most of the metro and now mostly by the rural fire agencies. And as a result, that system has been repaired when it's broken, but it has not had a forward-looking plan. And so we were approached a little less than a year ago to see if there was mutual benefit and interest, and we've worked together with the Fire Defense Board. We pulled in emergency management because they have some interest in this moving forward, and we are proposing a model that is very similar to what we already have in place for the LRIG system, where Lane County Technology Services would provide program and process management. We will hire a vendor to do the actual technical work, and then the Lane Fire Defense Board will be responsible for the funding and setting policy on that matter. This is a cost-neutral addition to the county. The Lane County Fire Defense Board has agreed to pay all of the associated expenses for this effort. And it's going to move us into a position where we're better able to provide, as a county, radio as a service, regardless of what kind of a radio a first responder has on their belt. We'll be able to tie them together a little bit better and provide that as a service regardless of what the emergency is or where or which agencies are responding. And I'm going to ask patients to speak a little bit to the impact to emergency management and our ability to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Farr. So we all remember Holiday Farm Fire, and we remember the snowstorm and the opportunities I guess I should say, the challenges we faced in communications capabilities for our first responders in the field. During the snowstorm, we lost Bear Mountain. The power backup supply there was not adequate enough to sustain a system due to lack of fuel. And we had to send our staff up there, or many staff from multiple jurisdictions, to ensure that those facilities maintain power to ensure communications capabilities to the first responders in the field that were doing welfare checking, that were clearing the roads, that were, you remember the Highway 58 corridor and the challenges there. We had to make sure that system was maintained, and that was for many first responders, not just fire, but multiple partners. And then when we lost Hagen in the Holiday Farm Fire, that was another opportunity for us to rebuild and take another look at our communications system as a capability. And working in the last 4 years, we've discovered that the approach with LRIG is the UHF system, and the approach with fire is the VHF system. And my approach is it should be a system of systems that we all use, have a primary system and a redundant system that all first responders can utilize to ensure communications, no matter where you are across Lane County. The other gap that I noticed was in my role in emergency management is really the mitigation factor. So there's the preparedness piece and making sure those systems can sustain a snowstorm or a wildfire, and the risks, the hazard vulnerability assessments across the board for all of those communications infrastructure on the hilltop. Let's step back and take a look at all of those pieces of equipment and be sure that they could withstand a seismic event. They could withstand a wildfire. And our first responders in the field are not focusing on those things. They're focusing on training their volunteers and fire suppression and wildland response, wildfire response. They have to have somebody else helping identify all those other pieces. And that's where I think the greatest value of bringing this to the county and getting it closer to the LRIG model and starting to help bolster our fire district's ability to communicate both within themselves and across Lane County, but interagency wide.
Thank you, Ms. Winningham. Chief Smith.
I appeared before this board recently and I spoke about a system that wasn't working, which was my own system for my own organization. And you might recall, I'll state two simple facts that you probably already know. One, Lane County is very big. And two is Lane County is made up of a lot of different bodies. And those different bodies come together to operate all the systems we know. But independent of each other, we have small voices. I am pro the idea that we work together. That we put the right people in the right roles to supervise the systems we have, and we start thinking about the future. The very infrastructure that we have is expiring, it's retiring, it's getting old and outdated, and there is no solution. And what is scary about that is our seasons and our conditions are not changing. They're only getting worse, and we are going to find ourselves trying to talk to each other in situations where the equipment that we fail to take care of, not because we are negligent with our equipment, but because we don't know. I don't know what's out there. That equipment will fail us when we need it. And we experienced some of that in some of these disasters that were just referenced. And so if nothing else, this move is a very positive step forward to bring us further and further together under the body and under the governance that represents all of the partners in Lane County, not just municipal partners.
Thank you, Chief Smith. Mr. Harmon, anything else to add?
No further comments, Chair. Thank you.
Then at this time, I'll look to the board for questions or comments. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you, Chief, coming here today. and adding your voice. This is just one of a series of technological improvements we need to make in emergency management. We've been able to fund some of them, but not all of them. We continue to go out and seek funding from the state legislature practically every session. But the last moment that you need your communication to fail is in the middle of the season, in the middle of a wildfire, whatever emergency is happening, and whatever we can do now to prevent that particular issue from coming up, I'm in full support of. I'll continue to advocate for technological upgrades in every part of our emergency management system. And this is just one instance of a crucial system that is in dire need. We know that we pull people from various special districts together in these times of need, and you don't always get the funding that you deserve. Clearly, this is a team effort, and I'm in full support.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Further discussion, questions? Commissioner Seneca.
Yeah, this is exciting. One of the few win-wins we get these days. I did have a question. Is this tied to our local utilities at all? Are they allowed to use these systems too, or is it just?
Our local utilities, several of them are already using the UHF side, so yes.
Nice. Okay. They are. So it'd be just a one bigger shared system when it's.
Yes.
That's great.
Yep. More interoperability.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further questions, comments? I'm seeing none. Just one thing I'm going to say, and that is, I kept track of the conversation. I was trying to keep track of how many times the word system was used in the conversation, and I lost track at about 16. But what that brings me down to, Ms. Willingham, is that what you said, we need a system with all these systems to bring them together so that we can speak to each other. And Chief Smith, you said this is a very positive step in the right direction. It's one of a number of positive steps, maybe one of the biggest that we've taken as far as communication during an emergency is concerned. So good work to get us to this point, and realizing that we're not quite there yet, that we still have work to do, and we still have equipment to procure, and really an integrated system to begin to provide now that we're taking this step. So with that, any further discussion? I'm seeing none. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move approval of Order 22-08-29-06 as presented.
I'll second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Vice Chair Trieger. Discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. Let's call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's the conclusion of today's meeting. Oh, no. We'll move down the agenda. Next item, as we're clearing the room, is item 14A, County Administration Report, in the matter of reporting on the proposed Lane Event Center multi-use community facility. And Mr. Mokryski, I'm going to ask if you will introduce your panel, which may only be a panel of one today, but.
Thank you, Chair. We do have representatives from the Clash Group that are on their way, and I think we can start the presentation. Lauren Blythe is here, Interim Director of Operations, to kick off the presentation, and then our team from the Clash Group will join us. We'll also have, I think we've slotted about 20 to 30 minutes for the presentation, so we'll have plenty of time, at least 30 minutes of time for commissioners to ask questions and enter into dialogue. So.
And Ms. Mokryski, if I may take just a moment, are there any disclosures that any board member wishes to discuss? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. As I do when we talk about the potential siting of the M Stadium, I disclose a potential conflict of interest, as I have had donors for campaigns that are both in favor and in opposition of of the M's here. I don't think it's an actual conflict of interest, so I'll continue with the conversation.
Well, you may have opened a can of worms there, Commissioner. Any further disclosures? Then, it's needless to say that most people in Lane County have a decision or a thought on this one way or another, and so we may all have that same potential conflict of interest, but thank you, Commissioner Buck, for declaring.
Specifically, it's just to be absolutely clear and transparent, donations to my campaign from the owners of the M's.
Thank you very much. And without further.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just say, so we have two items here. The first is a report and update, so a discussion on a status update on the project for you. That's a more lengthy discussion with question and answers. And then the second item is requesting approval of a contract amendment with the Clash Group. So I just want to be clear that we'll need to move forward with that second item in terms of action because we've used up our authority for spending on that contract. And so really, regardless of the path here, there's going to be some work necessary. You'll hear more about that in the update. But so an update first and then requesting action on that amendment.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. Lauren Blythe, Interim Director of Operations with Lane County. We're here today, as Steve indicated, to give an update on the multi-use community facility with the Eugene Emeralds as the anchor tenant located at the Lane Event Center. Quick recap of where we are. We most recently reported back to the board on June 27th. We held a work session that included Klosh Group, our owner's rep and consultant on this project, as well as some representatives from our design build team that we've been working with to provide construction estimates and some initial scoping and conceptual design work. What we learned from our design build partners are a few things. One is that the stadium, as it's currently sited and spec'd out, would overlap the livestock building, which would require a demolition and a rebuild. The estimate for that is around $10 million. Through several iterations of the design process and scoping, we were able to get the total project down to $100.5 million, including the livestock rebuild. The current funding gap, and we'll go through some of the details on the funding scenario, the current funding gap is $43 million on the project, and that assumes a Lane County allocation of 1.5 of the new 2 percentage point increase of TLT and car rental tax, transient lodging tax, car rental tax. We also heard in June that construction costs, once we get past around September or so, would begin approximately $300,000 a month in cost escalation. That number was provided to us by our design build partners as a reflection of inflation and just inherent escalation of costs due to the passage of time from the point in which the estimation was done earlier this year. We provided a couple of scenarios in June. Scenario 1 was an option to continue with design while additional funding is secured. That would allow us to move forward incrementally. And the scenario 2 was to place the project on hold, perhaps while we continue to secure funding. Quick update on the operations and maintenance negotiations and discussions. That has been in progress for some time and continues to be in progress by way of our owner's rep. The terms around that would be finalized prior to authorization for full construction funding. Some of the high-level terms around the O&M agreement is for the facility operator to be the Eugene Emeralds to handle kind of day-to-day operations, including booking and coordinating events in coordination and collaboration with the Lane Event Center and our fairground staff. Stakeholder coordination, meeting requirements, regulatory and otherwise, handling security, custodial, groundskeeping, et cetera. They would also be responsible for the regular repair and maintenance in coordination with Lane County to ensure that the facility was kept up to standards and in a timely fashion. Also part of the negotiations with the Emeralds are options for revenue sharing, naming rights, and parking arrangements still in discussion. Just a summary of the funding sources we have that have been committed or are being pursued to this point. We have received $1.5 million from the federal government for immediate occupancy. The state of Oregon has committed $7.5 million in a grant that we received from the 2022 session. We'll continue to work with and are eager to hear back from the City of Eugene about a potential contribution from them that the M's are also working with them on. And again, the potential or proposed 1.5 percentage point increase allocation from the transient lodging tax and car rental tax, we project it to be about $35 million upfront equivalent. The Eugene Emeralds have committed 13.5, which brings us to a total in terms of actual committed amount for 22.5 million plus the projected TLT gets us to about 57 million with a 43 million funding gap. A little bit on the funding source. We've discussed with the City of Eugene City Council discussed this matter in July. I believe they're in recess right now, and those discussions continue. And we've had a few meetings over the last year, and there are no predictions as of this point as to what that may result in. The TLT, transient lodging tax, again, is proposed funding, not yet allocated. That would be as directed by the board, and is intended to be used for or used in support of tourism-related facilities such as the Lane Event Center. The other contributions from Lane County in this regard around the land and the livestock building. The land is valued at around $9.5 million based on our most recent assessment for the 9.5 acres or so where the facility would be located. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the livestock building is estimated at $10 million including demolition and rebuild. Based on where we are now, the staff, with the funding gap and other considerations, with the current status of the project, our recommendation is to put the project on hold until we can identify additional funding sources and get those committed. We would only resume the project as directed by the board after staff come back with an update as to the funding status or state of the funding at that time. The part of this recommendation is that this on-hold status would not exceed 6 months. The nature of some of our procurements and contracts with the design-build team and others don't have an unlimited amount of time. There's a lifespan there, and so we think if we don't have anything further within 6 months, then we would return to the board as such and seek further direction. In this on-hold status, the recommended path forward would be that for us to come out of the on-hold status, we would again be seeking additional funding from other sources, whether that's the City of Eugene or other sources, and we would return to the board with the status of that and seek direction as well as look for solidifying the agreements with the Emeralds on O&M and funding for the design phase should that be directed by the board. If that is the direction by the board, this slide here indicates what the subsequent steps would be around design and permitting, additional funding, completing O&M negotiations, and then on to construction should we get that far. That's what we have.
That was less than 30 minutes, Chair. Although there's a lot of information packed into, we have a representative from Klosh is here with us now, so a lot of information packed into that quick presentation, so happy to take questions, add context, and go from there.
And I'd like to say this, you're not late, we're just early.
Sorry.
Thank you, please.
Ready for questions?
Ready for questions? So nothing from Klosh Group?
Lauren did an amazing job.
As always, yeah. Then we'll move forward to questions. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some comments, but I just want to clarify the phrasing in the presentation. It's less that you're looking for direction from us whether to pause or not. My understanding, and from just sort of writing on the wall, if you will, the project is paused because we don't have the resource to continue it at this time. And so this is really a discussion about what does it mean to be in that status, how we feel about the 6 month, any other questions and so on, and that really what you will be seeking is board direction to come out of a pause for any reason, whether you bring us other information about other funding sources or other status of the project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Chair, Vice Chair, that is accurate.
Thank you, Commissioner Trigger. Do you want to move forward with your other questions/comments, or would you like to go down the queue on that?
I'm happy to wait.
I'll look around the board. Commissioner Lovell.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you've gone through a whole litany of things that most people in this room know. We've researched and emailed and websited this project to death almost. We all know the statistics and the money that's required. I think the 6-month pause and the suggestion from staff to pause this is maybe prudent. It gives us 6 months to really actually look at the larger vision of what people have been asking, the public input's been about the Lane Event Center. I think that's a good question. Sometimes people think that maybe this was a whack-a-mole approach to put the stadium somewhere because it was the last piece of property that was available. And might I add, the county came through big time last year by donating or subjecting the property forward. That's, in my mind, about $12 million plus of input. And so I think the county came to the table willing to deal and willing to do a lot of things. And I think the county's been really forthcoming about putting this project as forward as possible as they can. It doesn't land on our shoulders entirely. It lands on a lot of people's shoulders. This is a big piece of pie, and there's some big chunks that people have to bite off. And I think the county's done a really good job biting off on those chunks. So I think it gives us time to really look at the overall vision of what we want to do as a community and a county. So I think this is not only a prudent step, it might seem like a failure, but I don't think it is. I think it's a step in the right direction. So thanks for suggesting it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovell. Further discussions? Commissioner Senegal.
So this goes into pause. What does it look like to come back to the Board of Commissioners? Some money shows up. You guys have this conversation. How do we make sure this comes back if we start closing that funding gap?
Chair, Commissioners, thank you for the question, Commissioner Senegal. So I think what that looks like is we have a duty to come back to the board regardless, whether it's the passage of time or new funding sources or anything else that is significant that warrants a return trip to the board for an update. And that could be contributions from, like I mentioned earlier, City of Eugene, or other sources that we're not yet aware of. But it is our responsibility to come back to the board in either case.
So maybe this is for the Klosh Group. What is the negative side to not moving forward with the plans at this point?
I think the downside to not moving forward is just simply that inflation keeps happening and costs go up. It just contributes to, it exacerbates a budget issue by pausing and taking longer to find the funding. It also creates a potential schedule. I'll show with the Emeralds, is that they have some deadlines about when they're gonna need to move out of PK Park and find a new home. And the longer this portion takes to develop a new home, we don't really know what that means for the team. So there's kind of both budget and schedule have some negative effects, certainly.
And is there any sort of timeline on the 1.5 and the 7.5 from the state and feds? What happens to that if we pause?
Chair, Commissioners, as I understand, the second 1.5 from the federal level is not likely to be allocated as advised to us by our legislative liaison. The second 7.5 from the state of Oregon, we won't have an understanding of what that looks like until we get closer to short session in 24. The end of this 6-month period gets us close to that. And so we may have a better idea in a few months, the probability of that, but it's too soon to tell at this point.
Thank you.
Further questions, comments? Vice Chair?
If not, then I'll just made some notes. I just want to note, when this first came to us, I think what I want to kick off is thanking the Emeralds ownership and management for bringing this opportunity to us. It's been a great chance to have some really important conversations, to dream big, to hear from the community, and to get excited about something. And when they did the initial, without any real information, estimate was $45 million, right? Had that held true, right? If we lived here, we'd be home by now, right? So here we are with this gap that I think is not for lack of trying. The community, by and large, has urged us to do all we can. And as has been mentioned by some of my colleagues, Lane County's done a lot, not only in offering the potential of a sizable piece of an asset that we hold, but the hundreds of hours of staff time that have gone into researching the feasibility and the opportunity, the partnerships, the advocacy to the state and to our federal delegation for support, vetting consultants and bringing on really high-quality folks to help us figure this out, and identifying other revenue resources and taking the bold step of increasing the transient lodging tax and car rental tax, which will only benefit our community eventually. We just don't know whether it's this project or another one, but we know that will happen. So I think I just want to start with just acknowledging all the work that this was a real opportunity and continues to be. This is not a referendum on the value of the Eugene Emeralds, clearly, right? Their contributions to the community are the culture, the vibrancy of the community, the accessible entertainment that they provide is undeniable. The clear message that everyone agrees on, whether in support of this particular project or not, is that, and it's rare to have something everyone agrees on, which is that there's recognition that the Lane Event Center is a really critical public asset that Lane County, we need and deserve to improve and upgrade the property in some way or another, and that people want more opportunities to come together, enjoy, and celebrate community. Like, those things are clear. Those are some really good and important lessons to come out of this that we can know and hold on to whatever we move forward with doing next. This isn't a this or that moment. We're not pausing this to make room for a particular other thing. We're pausing it because we've hit the end of our capacity to move this anywhere, and now we need to wait and see if some other folks step in and join us. So I appreciate the time limit on that, on how long we're going to allow for that to either happen or not happen. It's my understanding, as our administrator mentioned at the top of this item, there's still need for the board order that follows this item so that we can make that amendment to the contract with Klosh Group so they can continue to represent us with communications with project partners and in other matters related to this initiative, whatever its ultimate outcome. So, Chair, whenever you're ready for that order, I'm prepared to make that motion.
Thank you. Thanks, Vice Chair. Can you step back 2 slides? Project status. You know, the third bullet there is a really important one to me at this point in time, the uncertainty that's surrounding everything. We have a lot of people in this room that are sitting on the edge of the seats that are wanting certainty regarding what are we going to do. And the general approach today is, well, we're not going to give you any certainty today. We're just going to put it on pause again, and then in 6 months at the latest, look at it again. Well, in 6 months, the state will not have made any further determination. So after 6 months, we'll have to pause it again, it would seem. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think it's a very long shot that within 6 months, we're going to suddenly find a closure in the gap of $43 million. Can anybody help me with that? Is there any optimism on that? Well, you know, that's an unfair question because the city of Eugene's not really committed anything, and we don't know what the legislature is going to do. We heard that the federal government's not going to help us with it, and naming of this, naming rights and the other things that potentially could give us more money. You know, I'm leaning toward giving people a little bit of certainty today. You know, I think continuing to work on something that few people have any optimism that we're going to be able to make happen in the long run. Why do we want to pause it? Why do we want to keep holding on it? Why don't we just say, you know, we've given it our best shot. The county's already offered $9.5 million in land plus $10 million in replacing a building. We've already offered a bonding of 20 years of TRT, 20 years into the future of TRT. We've done what we can. There's nothing more the county can do other than we're waiting for other people to step forward and help us close that gap. I don't have a great deal of optimism that the people are going to step forward. I don't have a lot of optimism that after 6 months, should we pass the next order, that we'll be any closer than we are today, and we'll say, hey, y'all who are waiting on the edge of your seat, keep waiting on the edge of your seat. So, you know, I'm very serious about this. I don't know how much further down this road we can go. Mr. Black, can you tell me, let's take a step back to the county commitment regarding the commitment of TRT, the 20-year commitment of TRT. Tell the public and me, what does that mean, the TRT that we're proposing as a part of this, the funding?
Chair, Commissioners, the TRT, as we all recall, was increased by 2 percentage points in September, I believe, just about a year ago. The purpose of that is to dedicate or provide additional funding for tourism-related facilities, such as the Lane Event Center and the fairgrounds. In the context of this project, what that represents is potential, at the direction of the board, potential funding that would go towards debt service should we get to the point where we want to secure a bond to offset or to pay for construction, capital construction funding. Okay. And so that, whatever portion of that 2 percentage points it would be directed by the board would go towards the capital construction.
And give me a dollar range on that.
At the time, we projected, and this is a few months ago, we projected based on the TLT revenue from the past few years, we projected that 1.5 of the 2 percentage points would equate roughly to $35 million upfront.
So to get that $35 million, we would have to dedicate 20 years of revenue stream from TRT, which by state law is required to be used toward tourism. And there are a few other things that are thrown in there. But so it would be 20 years where future boards wouldn't have any choice of anything to do unless we paid the bond off early. Future boards would have no choice of what to do with that revenue stream. It's locked for 20 years. That's a part of the county's commitment on this. You know, the $35 million is locking a revenue stream for 20 years. It's dedicating $9.5 million worth of land in perpetuity, and it's replacing a $10 million building. And in the meantime, we've not had a great deal of successful participation by our local government partners, whose name is on the team, right? And we've not had certainly, I'm looking at Mr. Kyla back there, he's secured funding through the state legislature and continues to whip that as well as he can, and we all have a great deal of confidence in what may happen with the legislature, but still, that's not going to happen until beyond the 6-month time frame that we're looking at right now. I don't have a lot of optimism. So let's move forward with the discussion. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate hearing all the comments from my colleagues in advance. As I contemplate what we're actually doing here at the board, I, for one, don't want to see the M's leave Eugene. We've heard testimony after testimony of people sharing with us their experiences of going to the M's, and it's hugely sentimental. I went on the second date with my husband at the M's. Like, people remember these things. They remember when they were there, and they remember specific events. But ultimately, sentimentality does not pay the bills, doesn't pay for a project of this size. I wish it did, or we'd be overflowing with funding for this particular project. We're just not there. Without assistance from our partners, as you've heard from other commissioners, we have extended ourselves in large ways in order to see if we can make this happen. And I'm proud of that, because I would want to know that I've done every single thing that I've done to assist the M's in getting as far as they can in order to remain in Eugene. And if that's still possible, whether it be at the fairgrounds or somewhere else, I'm still on board. As we've talked about a larger vision of the Lane Event Center, I personally have shared on this board that I think its highest and best public use is to have a convention center with a neighboring hotel. And that doesn't negate the possibility of necessarily having the M's or any other activity on the adjoining property. I would welcome an opportunity to continue to spark interest in what we can do there, because the property continues to languish. It's not funded. It needs assistance. We've heard people, even this morning, talk about how dilapidated some of the structures are that are on that property and desperately need investment. I don't want to kill that spark today. I'm perfectly willing to continue those conversations with everybody that's involved. And I hope that my colleagues would still keep an open mind about what possibilities may come. We don't know if there are changes that could happen, decisions that are made in the coming months. But ultimately, I feel like we really need to dig in on what we're going to do with this facility for the better public good. There are a lot of people who really want to see something happen there. And if we're not able to move forward on this project yet or now, that we still need to figure out a way in order to utilize this site much better. The people really love it there for the fair, but I want them to love it there for all other uses, potential uses as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Commissioner Buck. Further discussion? Commissioner Laval.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just another comment. I mean, we're all here pontificating some degree of hope or lack of hope for this project to continue forward. And as our colleagues have illustrated, our main focus is about the Lane Event Center and its future and the whole future of the vision for this community. And I think what struck me as kind of a check and spirit red flag, if you will, was we need to make sure that we do something for the entire county and not something that is perceived to be just for one city. And so that's of concern with me. And I think, too, when we share visions of hope, I always remember something about hope that they taught me in the Navy, which I don't mean to be sarcastic, but at some point we have to face facts, face what's going on and what we really can do. The Navy told us that there's no such thing as hope, sailor, and hope is gluing wings on worms. So I'm hoping that we're not, with this pause, pushing forward, hoping that we're going to glue wings on worms, that we actually have a dutiful and a due diligence approach about where we're headed, and we get on that as soon as we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. For the discussion, Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you brought up that the community wants some finality. As the person in whose district the facility resides, I think we all have gotten lots of the group emails, and a lot of people send me the group one and then also send it to me individually as the commissioner, particularly neighbors living around that area. And I was at that place not long ago. Like, the community deserves some finality and an answer to figure out what's next. But I also don't want Lane County is given the impression that we're going to figure this out. And so I think the 6 months is a reasonable amount of time. I would not be in favor of an open-ended, let's wait and see what happens. But that is a finite amount of time in which others will understand what we have reached the limits of our ability to bring this to fruition. And now we will create that space for something else to happen, but not forever. So again, we're not, as I clarified at the top, we're not being asked to provide direction. We're being told that where staff is we've gone as far as we can. We want to, regardless, we need to pass this contract amendment so Clash Group can continue to do the work we've already set them on a path to do. And this does give the community some finality in that they know that we will have more certainty in an amount of time. We have not been able to give them that assurity until now. So I am comfortable with this. I'm not happy, but I'm comfortable with this status. And who knows, maybe something will come clearer sooner than 6 months, but we are giving the community the assurity that it won't go longer than that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Laval, third round.
Chair, just thank you. That just prompted a question to me to ask. If we're looking at approving the $73,000 extra for the Clash Group, is there maybe a couple extra points we could ask them to look into that would help us get further down the road of what to do with the Lane Event Center? Like maybe add to the master plan, or maybe look at some other options if there is other sites, or what it looks like to build a hotel, or just some of those kinds of extra informational things that we could add to this process going forward so it speeds up makes that 6 months a little more valuable to everyone?
You looked at me when you asked that question, and I don't have an answer to that. But I'll throw the question out. Is there that latitude in the contract that we have before us, or the contract you have before you that we're going to approve?
Well, my general comment would be, I don't think what you articulated is within the scope of the contract that we have with.
Extra.
Right, and different. So, do you have a?
Yeah, so the contract before the board, or actually in the subsequent item to this, is our way of assuring that we have the resources to augment staff time and the expertise that we've received from Klosh for coming back to the board for whatever reason. The scope of that contract is for professional services, project management. It's actually fairly open and vague. What I think you may be asking is not so much what's under the contract, but what can staff bring back, or what can we be focused on in conjunction with Klosh to bring additional information when we come back. And without knowing exactly what that is, it's difficult to say whether it falls into that contract or if it would fall under staff time.
Either way, it'd be difficult to insert that into the contract more or less during discussion in today's discussion. So bearing in mind that everybody understands that question, Commissioner Lovell, I don't think that it can be considered as a part of the contract that we're considering approving for you. Then I'm going to say just a couple more things. You know, I've been to see the M's a couple of times this year. Last night I stayed up late to watch the Orioles thrash the White Sox, and that was a great thing. But you know, we all love baseball, and given our love of baseball and our love of you know, the M's, and as far back as, you know, when my kids were this tall, and they're now a lot taller than that, and their kids are taller than that. We've all gone to the games. The last game I went to, I bought the catcher's jersey, for crying out loud, because it had number 5 on it. You know, I mean, we all love the M's, but that's not what this is about. You know, if it were all about sentimentality, if it were all about just Lane County voting to keep the M's, that's an easy discussion, isn't it? Who would say no? But we're dedicating a stream of revenue for 20 years. We're dedicating a piece of property in perpetuity, and we're tearing down a very functional livestock barn and replacing it. You know, there are a lot of things that we are doing that we've conceded to get us to this point in time. And when I first came to America, I'd never owned a bike, and I wanted a bike. And I said, Dad, can I have a bike for Christmas? My dad said, no, not this Christmas. I was very disappointed. Got one the next Christmas. I got one my next birthday. But the fact is, I would rather have heard no than maybe, you know. And right now we're saying maybe, 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 maybe. And I don't know. I think people would rather hear yes or no. And if I were to precipitate a decision at this point in time, I'm afraid that decision has got to be no. So let's move forward. Vice Chair Trieger.
Chair, I move approval of Order 22-08-29-07 in the matter of approving one contract amendment with Klosh Group, Inc. and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the amendment.
I'll second.
Go ahead.
Well, I get to choose who seconded. So moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. Order 22-08-29-07. Is there any discussion to that motion? And Mr. Muckrice, can you tell us and the public exactly what this motion means?
If you approve this, you would be authorizing an amendment to continue to work with the Klosh Group over the course of the next 6 months as needed. So it doesn't guarantee that we're going to spend the money you're authorizing. It just gives us the ability to engage with this consultant that has been critical on this project to date in assisting us to continue to do work over the course of the next several months as needed.
Is that clear to everybody? You stated that very clearly so anybody listening could very well understand it. Any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Seneca.
Yeah, I would just say that I agree with everybody here and everybody out there. 6 months. This is go time. It gets done or it doesn't. I mean, this is where we're at, and I'm more than willing to give that 6-month deadline at this point.
Very good. Further discussion? Then I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any, I say nay. Passes 4-1 with FAR in opposition. Thank you for being here this afternoon, everyone in the audience. That gives us 6 months in order to precipitate, hopefully, final decisions from the other funding partners in this and find a way to build a stadium. Give us a moment to clear the room. And Mr. Mokrajewski, we're going to step back in time a little bit to, I think it's item 9A, which is announcements from the administrator. And if you wish to wait a few moments before you begin, that's...
No, that's fine. I can start, and then Alex can make his way up here. I'll do a quick fire update. I'm not sure if it'll be quick. And then Alex is here to talk about the state habitat conservation plan. So first, fire update. After last week's lightning storm, we have several new fires on the landscape in Lane County. Our primary concern right now remains the Lookout Fire, the Horse Creek Fire, and Bedrock fires. Those 3 fires plus the Pothole Fire have been combined under the same incident management team, Team 2, and we continue to work closely with them. Just to give you some totals, the Bedrock Fire is now nearly 32,000 acres. It is approximately 71% contained. There's approximately 696 total personnel that have worked that fire. The Lookout Fire is over 22,000 acres, approximately 17% contained. 937 personnel have worked that fire. Horse Creek Fire is 597 acres, it's 0% contained, and the Pothole Fire is 99 acres and it's 0% contained. There are evacuation levels associated with those fires. For more information, including an interactive map, it can be found at www.lanecountyor.gov/fires. There's also related evacuation notifications in Lynn County related to the Lookout Fire. The sheriff has been providing regular video updates on our 2 evacuation-specific Facebook pages. People should follow those pages for updates regarding the Bedrock Fire and the Lookout and Horse Creek fires. There are also several new fires east of Cottage Grove. The Pacific Northwest Team 12 is back in our area after a very short break to take over management of those fires, as well as the Chilkoot and Ridge fires. Not a lot of information related to those fires yet. We expect that will change with an incident management team taking over today. Those fires are burning in the Umpqua National Forest, and so far there are no related evacuations. However, there's extensive forest closures around all of those fires. Sheriff's Office and our emergency manager are doing a briefing this afternoon on those, so we'll have more in the coming hours and days. Finally, for today, update you on Pete's Lake Fire. Over the weekend, we were made aware of a fast-moving wildfire in the popular Mink Lake Basin in the Three Sisters Wilderness. We issued a level 3, which is go now evacuation, including a wireless emergency alert, which helped get people to leave that area. The fire has also prompted evacuation notifications in Deschutes County. This, I think you all are aware, but typically we would just be moving into peak fire season for our communities, and clearly this is a different year that we have, as we've been in fire season for many, many weeks now. Thankfully, the weather forecast looks cooler and more moderate weather that will help with fire suppression. I even see some precipitation in the forecast, so that's good. Minus any lightning strikes. That's always a problem with, when we get precipitation and weather that moves through this time of year. Lightning strikes are a huge, huge threat this time of year. So we have many more weeks of fire season left. We all should continue to be prepared for additional fires and for fire behavior on existing fires to increase and prompt increased evacuation. So again, the notice to keep your phone charged, sign up for the emergency alerts, keep your phone on, particularly when you're, at bed at night. Keep those on and go into lanecountyor.gov/fires for those updates. That's it on fire. I feel like we'll be doing those updates for several more weeks. And then Mr. Kyler is here and has some information to walk you through. We have a meeting that is scheduled towards the end of September with the governor related to this issue. And so we do have some time to get some feedback from the board on what we'd like to, how we'd like to position the county in those discussions. So Mr. Kyler can give you a little bit more information and then let you know what we're thinking in terms of the positions that Lane County can take, and we'd like your feedback on that. So.
Good afternoon, Board. Alex Kyler, your Intergovernmental Relations Manager. So this issue arose, I believe, last week. There was an assignment to move an item into the staff realm that is a call for direction from the board related to, as the administrator just told you, a meeting that is being scheduled towards the end of September with the governor's office to discuss future ways to mitigate impacts to the county forest trust lands. So a little bit of a background on county forest trust lands. There are 15 Oregon counties that have county forest trust lands, and essentially these were forest lands that came into county ownership through tax foreclosures, really, my understanding, mostly towards the beginning of the 20th century. In the 30s and 40s, counties had accumulated enough land that they were trying to figure out how to best move forward with managing those properties, and entered into an agreement with the Oregon Department of Forestry whereby the Department of Forestry would manage those lands for the greatest permanent value. That term became a big deal starting in about 2016, I think, particularly for us. The Board of Commissioners at the time decided to join in a class action lawsuit against the Department of Forestry because the allegation was that counties were injured because the Department of Forestry had not met the terms of its agreement under contract for management of those lands. And what had really happened was, as time moved along, the definition of the greatest permanent value changed for many people. That case reached fruition in, I believe, there was a decision, I want to say in 2020 or 21, a Linn County jury did agree that the Board of Forestry, the Department of Forestry, had voided its contract and awarded the counties a judgment of $1.1 billion. The Oregon DOJ then appealed that verdict to the Court of Appeals, and that court did overturn the decision of the lower court. Counties appealed that decision to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court declined to hear that case in September of 22, essentially ending that 6-year effort. In March of 2019, the Department of Forestry kicked off an effort that it called the Habitat Conservation Plan, and it's meant to be a forest management plan that has a duration of about the next 70 years. The idea was that the Board of Forestry wanted to initiate that process in order to really, in a comprehensive manner, address the 17 federally listed species that exist within Oregon state forest lands, including county forest trust lands. So the big ones were the marbled murrelet out in the Coast Range and the northern spotted owl, particularly in the valley and the foothills of the Cascades. So the idea was that Habitat Conservation Plan would create better predictability into the future for preparing, selling, and harvesting operations on state lands. But recognizing that the footprint of those lands, at least in the first half of the plan for about the next 35 years, really would be impacted, and so thus would the county revenues that come out of the agreement with the Department of Forestry. So I just want to touch a little bit on those outcomes that we have experienced through entering into the agreement with the Department of Forestry for Lane County. We're not the largest nor the smallest county when it comes to county forest trust lands. The really big ones are Tillamook and Clatsop, where they've got hundreds of thousands of acres that the state manages. But we're not the smallest either. We're really pretty much right in the middle. We're like sixth largest in terms of acreage and revenue realized off of those lands. So we've got about 25,000 acres. They're not continuous. It's not one single plot of land. I think I've been on some of those lands. They're sort of west of Veneta in the Coast Range. We have enjoyed revenue off of those lands for the entire period. Those are become general funds, and the way the agreement was is that the counties receive really the larger share of the revenue. The Department of Forestry wants to cover its costs, of course, in preparing the lands for sale, and so it peels off funding. There's a tranche of funding that goes to the counties, and when I use that term counties, I'm talking about writ large, right? The county, the amount of money that's generated inside the county, that is not necessarily, the revenue is shared with where that stump is located. So any taxing district that has an overlay over where that tree was harvested is going to receive a proportional share of the revenue. Now, these are a lot of rural lands, so you do have some school districts that receive money. You do have some fire districts that receive money. I don't know if you have water districts, but maybe there's some water districts. But at any rate, you know, we, in 2022, for example, the amount of money that Lane County got as the taxing district was about $2.3 million. If you look back in time, just a couple, well, over like the last 10 years, the highest revenue that we received was in 2020. So $5.5 million was the highest in that 10-year period. So this is sort of classic timber harvest, right? I mean, there are a lot of variables about how much timber is harvested off the lands and what the market value is. But the high point for us over the last 10 years has been 2020. And really, it's not 2022 when we netted the 2.36 million. The Department of Forestry harvested about 230 acres of land, so it was really not you know, out of the 25,000, not a huge amount of harvest off the Lane County properties. So, at any rate, as this plan evolved, the Council for Forest Trust Land Counties, which is an affiliate of the Association of Oregon Counties. It's got a board of directors. Commissioner Lovall sits on that board of directors. He doesn't just represent Lane County. He's got a district that's got Coos. I think I've got the listing here. But anyway, there are a number of counties that his position represents. So the Association of Oregon Counties has a staff person who staffs the council, and whose salary is at least partially paid by the council, and that's Brendan Persinger. Some of you may know or have seen Brendan. He works on natural resources for AOC. So he met with, I met with him about 2 weeks ago. Was really the first time I'd become aware of this, although I did note that actually I was at that first Department of Forestry meeting back in March 2019 where they did kick off the Habitat Conservation Plan. The impact that AOC is estimating, they've gone through an exercise where they're estimating the fiscal impact to the county itself as a taxing district. And you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Lovell, but my understanding is that they think it's about a $300,000 a year hit to our 40%. General fund revenues is what they're estimating. And so as this plan has evolved, the governor's office and their natural resources policy director reached out to the association and said, we would like to get a meeting with you. We recognize that there are going to be these impacts, and we want to go over some things that might help to mitigate those impacts. And then, so they're sort of hoping to get a sense of, collaboration and agreement on how we might be able to manage through this next 35-year period of time. Brendan had come up with a list of things that counties might ask for. So I'll just read you these. I think you'll recognize some of them. So one of the things that could be done, for example, is the state could come up with a PILT model. That's a payment in lieu of taxes model. We already have PILT money that the county receives from the federal government where federal properties are not taxed, including things like the federal courthouse, but also federal lands, monuments, those kinds of different frameworks that the federal government owns. There could be a land transfer mechanism whereby any county forest trust lands that are taken out of harvest would be replaced by the state with lands that are harvestable. So that would involve the state bringing in some additional forest lands. Not exactly sure how that would work, but that land transfer mechanism is something that that AOC was brainstorming on. He talked to me about a portion of the harvest tax currently in law would be diverted to the county. A state appropriation to the county based on historic levels. That's really like the SRS model, right? A new statewide tax with revenue dedicated to replace state forest revenues. Apparently that was done back in the 30s after the Tillamook burn. There was a statewide tax that I was not aware of. Land could be returned to the county to be managed by the county. It would remain subject to the, to the Habitat Conservation Plan, but there are a number of counties that already own county lands and manage them. They employ a county forester and they receive revenues from those lands. I actually talked to Brendan about a different idea, one that I had come up with back when we were actually in the Lynn County lawsuit and we were trying to get our courthouse bonding capacity approved by the legislature. And that is that I could have conceived a world where the state would set aside some bonding capacity for county capital projects, and that when a county would be ready for their project, they could basically lay their card on the table and say, we're ready, and a guy like me wouldn't have to run around to every building in the Capitol and try to twist people's arms. It would just be a done deal.
There's no guy like you.
Yeah. So at any rate, AOC has done, I think, a nice job of giving us all data about what these impacts are. They believe the conversation with the governor's staff is going to be, what is the problem your county will experience? What are potential solutions to these problems, and where do you want that solution to come from? So there are a number of counties apparently who have said, look, it's not just the harvest revenue, it's the impact of the communities, it's the impact of jobs in our communities. And so, I don't know who actually, but I think it's some of the larger counties or the larger acreage counties where they really are foreseeing almost a repeat of the federal impact that Lane County really felt way back in the late 80s and early 90s where, timber jobs really just disappeared. So those counties may be sort of contemplating different kinds of priorities. So what I'm looking for here today is that I'm going to assume that staff will stay involved with this issue, that we will be helping Commissioner as he moves up into this meeting with the governor's office that we expect to occur in late September. Commissioner, you may actually still be
22nd, I get back.
You'll be back. Okay. So hopefully we will be ready to go. I'm recommending that the PILT model, I think, would be a good model for us to pursue. The general fund of counties based on historic levels, the SRS-like model, I think could probably be workable. The capital bonding CHIT, if you will, I think could work. And then land is returned to the county for management, I think could work. And I know that generated some discussion here the other day. The reason that I'm put that onto the list is that anything we do at the legislature, could get undone by a future legislature. And so at least having the lands under our own management and ownership would bring some certainty, I think, in terms of like, okay, we would be managing them forward. And this isn't something that it'd be new for Lane County, but not something new for the counties in Oregon. There are a number of counties that do manage their own lands. I was able to talk to some of those counties the other day, and I felt they felt like it was a really good way to go. We do live in a we live in a community where there are plenty of resources to help manage those kinds of lands. We train foresters in the state of Oregon through the state forestry school. So I think those kinds of workforce and infrastructure do exist for us to be able to keep that on the list as an option moving forward. So those were the four out of the ideas on the table thus far that I'm recommending, and I think that was the reason why you wanted me to come back today and sort of flush this out for you more. So I wasn't really contemplating a motion other than you may have just gauge your reaction to those four concepts. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But let me make sure, and we'll have commissioners, the four options are the PILT and an SRS-ish kind of looking model, ownership, transfer of deed, or bonding on a statewide level.
Bonding capacity.
Bonding capacity.
That we could, I mean, it would depend on the project that we would have and the value of it, but it might be something like, no more than once every 5 years, a county may come forward and ask for no more than such and such amount of money. But I think as the conversation that you just had aptly shows, that capital is really difficult for us to secure. We spend a lot of time and energy trying to cobble together budgets for capital construction. And frankly, I think that that's an intriguing idea to see if the state would be able to say, okay, we recognize you do have capital needs. We think those are better serve people of Oregon. You come forward and you're going to have an account that's actually just dedicated to those 15 counties, and you could take advantage of some capital money when you're ready.
Well, gone are the days that we can pay cash to pave the edges of Fern Ridge Lake, and gone are the days that we can build this building with cash, which we have done in the past. Those days are long in the past and probably never in the future. But Mr. Calla, before I go to Commissioner Buck for a question or comment, you believe any four of those approaches is viable and worth discussion? Is that what I gleaned from your statements today?
Mr. Chair, yes. I think those are all viable ideas. Like I said, I think one of the things we'll want to talk to the governor's office about is, well, how confident are you that we could actually pass any of those things through the legislature? There was a bill this session to actually authorize counties to take back their lands, and it did not advance. There was a robust testimony over that measure. And so those are the kinds of questions I think we would want to make sure that the governor's office is really going to be a hard-charging advocate for these solutions if they are really offering to help mitigate what could be. I mean, I feel like lately there's been a lot of communications to the administrator like, we just lost 100,000 here, 100,000 there, a couple million here. I mean, these are really having impacts on our ability to plan for services moving forward.
Well, thanks, Mr. Calla. I tongue-in-cheek a moment ago said there's nobody else like you, and I, from experience, I've worked with AOC and other agencies in the LGAC and in HHS, and really, you do a superb job for Lane County, unturning the stones and giving us the options before us. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Has there been any discussion from the governor's office, narrowing of any particular options? Are you still, this is pre-discussion with the governor's office?
Chairman Farr, Commissioner Buck, I've not had a single conversation with the governor's office about this. I think this will be, from my understanding, the first meeting. I do have a lot of respect for the governor's policy director, and this is Jeff Huntington. Some of you may recognize that name. He ran the Tallwood Institute at OSU and UO for a number of years. He's done a lot of work with sustainability issues, and I think he's a very quality person, and so I really do look forward to hearing his response. My assumption is, and Commissioner Lovell, you may have more information, but I know Brendan Persinger has had conversations with him. Whether Brendan vetted this entire list, I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting, creative way to think about potentially funding a new county courthouse, public safety building, capital construction needs. That intrigues me probably more than any of the others. I mean, mainly because SRS type funding and PILT type funding continues to narrow and narrow over time, and I guess we're not necessarily guaranteed, well, maybe it could be something in the contract, but guaranteed that amount in a future, like you mentioned, a future legislative session, they could just wipe that out. So that does concern me. I have high reservations of managing the forests ourselves as a service from the county. And so just for my personal feedback is to pursue capital construction money as best as possible.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the discussion. Okay.
I have lots of questions, really.
Commissioner Seneca.
Not to put you on, oh, I thought you called on me, sorry.
I did.
If you were going to list these in 1 through 4, Mr. Kyler, is that possible? I mean, what you would prefer to go after, the lowest hanging fruit, most efficient? I know it's kind of a tough question putting you on the spot, but there's a lot of different ways this can go. I originally was very hesitant about managing our own forest, but I'd like to explore that more. I mean, what other counties are doing it? Can we talk to them? What have they learned? Can they shorten that learning curve?
Chairman Farr, Commissioner Seneca, it's a really good question. I mean, I listed them 1 through 4 as PILT, general fund to the county based on historic models, that's a SRS model, the capital bonding, and then land is returned to the county for management. I will say, for example, my response to Commissioner Buck, I mean, there's a real trade-off. I like the idea too of capital bonding, but it's a very narrow use. And I'm going to assume if the administrator were answering that question, he'd say, give me something that's as flexible as possible. Give me something that is strictly general funds, which is what we enjoy today. So those would be PILT, SRS Lake, or land return to the county for management, which would give us complete discretion over how those dollars are spent, depending on what, I mean, SRS, we don't have complete discretion over. We have some of those dollars that have to go to roads, some that go to the county school fund, and then others that are completely discretionary. So even that model, I think, SRS from a federal level is not completely discretionary. I think what we would like to emphasize probably in that meeting with the governor's office as well, we want something that's as discretionary as possible, given that the revenues from which these were historically derived were completely discretionary.
Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just say, just following up, I'm mostly just listening because it's a fairly new topic for me, but I'm also weighing the balance between discretionary good, but more long-term, reliably sustainable and to stay where it is also good. And so that might be the trade-off, sort of what I'm hearing. And ultimately, it's not like we are the ones that get to say, let's do that thing, right? There's many more players and many more steps to take. So I would say us ranking them actually limits us in having the most expansive conversations and keeping as many options on the table as possible. I think we should be in these meetings and in any conversations, keeping them all as open as possible to see where it all sorts out. It's a little too early to be picking one.
Chairman Farr, Commissioner Trigger, the other thing that I don't know the answer to is that when, we got bonding authority for the courthouse because those were Article Q bonds to improve a state facility, and I think even that was a bit of a stretch, frankly. I think the Legislative Council sort of figured out how to make that work. But my point being is that most of the allowable usages for bonded dollars in the state of Oregon are enshrined in the Constitution. So I don't know, I mean, if that idea had to take a constitutional amendment, you know, to me, that's sort of like the new statewide tax that was done after the Tillamook burn. I just don't know that that environment exists today to get a yes vote on a statewide tax or a constitutional amendment. So those are big question marks too.
That was before I moved to Tillamook. Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. Commissioner Laval.
Yeah, I think I'll pull up the rear here. I think, Mr. Kyler, you are an amazing, detailed legislative policymaker, and you brought that to the simplest way that we could understand it. So thanks for putting all that into one big storyline that we could understand. I think those four measures, and you ranked them PILT, SRS number 2, bonds number 3, and lands number 4. When you were ranking those, it reminded me of why I got into real estate, and because I was watching the stock market go up and down and up and down, and I was pumping money into it and didn't have any control over it. It was kind of like out of my hands. And I think the reason I got into real estate was because I wanted to touch and feel something I could influence. And so that kind of thinking hits me when I look at this. The PILT things, as Commissioner Buck brought up, and SRS money, you know, we've seen cuts in SRS now over the course of 4 different cuts. Now we're down to, what, 11% of what it was before, I think. And when we look at these 24,000 acres of lands, we're not looking at a huge amount of money. What estimates I've heard back on these 24,000 acres of lands is sustainably harvested to their maximum potential is about $30 million a year. So it's a chunk of money if it's done properly. I think the consideration, if we had our own lands and, you know, county doesn't run forestry, but like you said before, there's lots of contract people out there we could hand this off to and rely on, and they do a super job at doing it. So as you start going through the pros and cons of PILT and bonds and SRS and flexibility that Mr. Mokrzycki needs in a budget and all that, you tend to keep coming back to it's our hands. As long as we can feel it, touch it, and control it, then we can dictate how it best suits and uses itself availability to the rest of the citizens of this county. And so even though maybe it might be a creative idea out of the box, the more I circle around this like a hawk, the more I keep landing on lands, doing our own lands, our own government, putting that away from the state burden and using that to our best interest and highest and best use in the county. So if we did anything in this recommendation to go forward, recommending to the governor in this meeting, it would be that our preference is to control our own destiny. You know, it's a well-known fact that the federal government owns more land in Lane County than anybody, and they pay 0 taxes. So the more land that the government owns in our county, the less revenue we get from it. And so I'm all about claiming some of those lands back and getting the revenue due us accordingly.
Thanks, Commissioner. Further discussion in the second round, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I definitely understand the argument that's being made for having land returned to the county. My main issue, from my limited knowledge of what's being presented today, is that if that occurred, it's going to be enormously controversial in our community. And we will have a lot of feedback on exactly how the county would go about managing that. We have so many other services that we provide. I wouldn't want that to overshadow what we do, and I would anticipate that. Just given what we've heard so far when we talk about trees in our community, it can be very controversial. So I just wanted to share my reasoning behind that.
And thanks for that, Commissioner Buck. Just tongue-in-cheek, I'll say controversy is something that really moves things forward quite often, because you precipitate the discussion that just hovers out there if you don't have the controversy. Commissioner Laval?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that if I could. I think that As we move forward, I understand exactly what you're saying, Commissioner Buck, about the controversy and all that, what we do with trees, but we have to understand at some point, we're a county that grows trees, and a portion of those trees are farmable, marketable, and economically viable. And so for us to say, hey, it's 24,000 acres out of the millions of acres that we have available in Lane County, I think small potatoes. Even today, there was a discussion about how the hijinks term old growth was being used into environmentally weaponize how we use our forest lands. And the old term that used to be out there in the logging and the government industry was a tree that was 400 or 300 years old was considered old growth. Now you have mills that are saying that trees that are semi-old growth are trees 21 inches in diameter and larger, just because of the mill capacity of how they can mill those trees. So the conversation now has been coming around to where, well, trees 100 to 200 years old are considered old growth, and they're really not. Those are third generation trees. So what we're talking about on these lands is actually second, third, and sometimes fourth generation trees. These are lands that are farmlands, if you will. And I think we need to think about them as that. And if we brand them as such in the community, I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Commissioner Buck, but I think that would well suit the controversy of how people respond to it by saying, look, if we don't claw back every little bit of revenue that we can, we're going to find ourselves in a position that we've lost so much little bit of steps that we're going to wonder how we got where we are.
Well, to avoid further controversy today, we'll move toward precipitation of the end of this conversation. But Mr. Kyler, thank you for giving us all the information. And, you know, it's a discussion that's been surrounding us for a long, long time. And sometimes one group is louder than another group in making their it doesn't matter who's the bigger group, who is the more prevalent group is the loudest, that quite often is the one that is heard the most. We all know that. So did a number I wrote down here, 230 acres in 2022. Did you say that 230 acres netted 2.3 million to the county?
That's my understanding from looking at the reports from the County Forest Trust lands.
230 acres got $2.3 million for the county.
There's 24,000 in the inventory.
Okay, and there's 24,000. So the and you know that's the number that I wrote down. So the smallest forest fire we have burning right now is how many acres?
32,000. Oh, the smallest?
Yeah, the smallest.
99 acres.
99 acres. Okay, I'm a fairly decent mathematician. I can convert 99 acres and divide that into 2.3 million. Okay, well, you know, I mean, the discussion is surrounding the highest and best use of our forests, and that's, whether it's controversial or not, it's a discussion that probably will, and whether it's us having it or not, it's going to happen. Well, thanks, Mr. Kyler. And Mr. Mokryski, thank you for bringing Mr. Kyler forward for that discussion. It's not the end of the discussion, clearly. Any further announcements, Mr. Mokryski?
That's it.
Any questions from Mr. Mokryski regarding the first part of announcements, which was forest fires and the current emergency existing in Lane County? We get regular updates. Mr. Adams has been given pretty detailed and regular updates, and my commendations, high commendations for the amount of information that Mr. Adams puts forward. Then we'll move down the list and look to Commissioners' business. Any announcements from our Board of Commissioners? Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. I've got kind of a lengthy one. When we joined the AOCC a few months back, one of the requests was that when there was an AOCC meeting, I'd come back and report to the board. So I've got a couple of highlights here. I want to report to the board. It's about 5 minutes, if it's appropriate now. If not, I can do it later. It's your call.
Well, why don't you get started and keep it as short as you can.
All right. Well, we had a meeting in Grants Pass Thursday and Friday. Mr. Kyler was there. A few of the mission goals of the AOCC is to maintain permanent organization within 18 Oregon counties having financial interests in timberlands to be sustainably managed. It's a law that was given to the AOCC, Oregon and California Trust Lands in 1937. It's about 2.2 million acres. But now that Lane County is back at the table, we're once again a part of the consortium that seeks cooperation with the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service for revenue that's due our county by law. So this is what the premise of the AOCC stands for. One of the pressing discussions revolved around the Secure Rural Schools funding that's scheduled to end this October. Now, it's been extended a couple of times, but as Commissioner Buck mentioned earlier, it's always been, as it extended, it's been shrunk down. The SRS funds are payments made to counties who faced failing and falling timber revenues to fund roads, forest management, in ecosystems, plus rural schools. Each cycle since 2000, the amounts have diminished. The coming decisions facing our county is whether to push for an extension of these funds or to rely on timber receipts on ONC land, which could be affected by the current habitat conservation plan. Now, here's a victory. I want to do a great shout out to our representative, Val Hoyle. Val Hoyle came to bat for us at a meeting a few weeks ago and was in a meeting with the assistant BLM director, and she pressed her to put in writing that the habitat conservation plan, which the AOC has been fighting for, not being a overlay layer of the ONC lands, not be permitted in because it's not part of the original 1937 agreement. And she got that in writing back from the assistant BLM director, which I thought was fabulous. So through the AOCC, there's a couple of litigations going on, and though the AOCC is not a litigating body, there's 2 cases which we need to keep our eyes on that would help us claw back some timber revenue that's due us that we've been fighting for. The major consolidated case is being now presented en banc, which is basically, instead of going to 3 of the judges, it goes to the full panel of judges in Washington, D.C. by the ONC body to keep the BLM from classifying ONC lands for non-timber uses. That's one of the ways that they're trying to take the lands off the inventory, by reclassifying them. The Murphy Plywood Company is also doing a case of their own, which is the same heading in the Ninth Circuit Court. So there's 2 cases that are kind of colliding at the same time, hoping to get an answer back from the court. This should be settled in about a handful of months, and we should return for a later date to update you on that. So why is all this important? Timber receipts in the past has paid our county in upwards of $40 million a year, not to mention the multiplier effects of jobs and housing and funds for services and public safety dollars, et cetera. The other thing that the public needs to know is that the federal government is the largest landowner in Lane County, as I said before, and they don't pay any taxes, and they don't pay their fair share. So in order for us to really get some revenue from our own property that we manage and own in Lane County, I think this is a way to keep the government accountable to what they need to settle with us. The sustainable harvesting production of BLM timber is critical to the economic, ecological, and fire management, which the ONC Act was meant to sustain generations into perpetuity. I'm honored once again to be a part, to have a seat at the table with the AOCC and this organization who is committed to holding the government to its word and the amount of economic benefit that is due the counties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's in writing, I take it.
Yes, sir.
Well covered. Any other announcements from Commissioner Buck?
I don't have an announcement. I just have a request from Commissioner Lovell, which is if you could have the secretary of AOCC please forward the minutes of the meeting over. I would like to see them, but I'm not sure. Maybe everybody else would too.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Seems a reasonable request. Thank you. Yeah. Very good. Other announcements? Any other announcements? Okay. Then I guess I have a bit of an announcement, and it's just that what I did this morning, Ms. Mokrowski, I went and saw the new teachers the old teachers meet the new teachers in Bethel School District, and it just is delightful to see many of them straight out of college coming to their first classroom, many of them first, second, third, and fourth grade teachers, and the amount of energy that was present there at Wolverine Field this morning was just amazing, and it really is delightful to see the enthusiasm of new teachers. And getting ready to enter the classroom for the first time. Enjoyed that a lot. So no other announcements, and we'll move along to any future board assignment requests. I see none. Then, Ms. Mokrowski, do you have a summary of assignments?
I don't have any.
Well, what a day.
There we go.
Actually, I have a future board assignment request. Can you find $50 million? No, never mind.
Working on it.
Okay, I'll hold that one. We'll hold that one. Then with that, our next board meeting is
September 19th.
September 19th. Thank you very much for that reminder. With the sound of my gavel, we are adjourned, and we will be in semi-recess until September 19th.